Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her back against the ancient oak tree, her heart hammering against her ribs as the massive grizzly bear emerged from the underbrush. The morning mist of Yellowstone National Park clung to the forest floor like ghostly fingers, and somewhere in the distance a raven's call echoed through the silence. Elena had been tracking this particular bear, a female she'd nicknamed Artemis, for 3 months, studying her behavioral patterns from what she believed was a safe distance. Artemis stood nearly 8 feet tall on her hind legs, her dark brown fur rippling with muscle as she tested the air with her keen nose. Elena knew that one swipe from those powerful claws could end her life in an instant, yet something in the bear's amber eyes gave her pause. Not aggression, but a deep, ancient intelligence that seemed to be evaluating her with the same scientific curiosity she applied to her research. "Easy, girl," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. She slowly reached into her field vest and withdrew a small digital recorder, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. Years of studying apex predators had taught her that sudden movements were often the difference between life and death. Artemis dropped to all fours and approached with surprising grace for such a massive creature. Elena held her breath as the bear circled her, close enough that she could smell the earthy musk of her fur and feel the warmth radiating from her body. The scientist in Elena was fascinated by this unprecedented behavior. Grizzlies typically avoided human contact, especially protective mothers during denning season. What Elena didn't know was that Artemis had been watching her too. For weeks, the bear had observed this strange, two-legged creature who moved through her territory with respect rather than dominance. Unlike the loud tourists who trampled through the forest taking pictures, or the hunters who reeked of fear and metal, this human carried herself differently. She moved quietly, left no trace, and never once tried to corner or pursue her. The standoff lasted nearly 20 minutes. Elena remained perfectly still against the oak tree, its rough bark pressing into her spine through her jacket, while Artemis continued her careful inspection. The bear's breath created small clouds in the cool mountain air, and Elena could see the intelligence behind those golden eyes. A mother's protective instinct, tempered by curiosity about this unusual visitor to her domain. Finally, Artemis made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Instead of moving away or displaying aggression, she settled into a sitting position just 10 feet from Elena, her massive head tilted slightly, as if inviting conversation. It was a gesture that defied every textbook Elena had ever read about. Bear behavior, yet she instinctively understood its significance. "I'm not here to hurt you," Elena said softly, her voice carrying across the space between them like a bridge. "I just want to understand." Artemis remained motionless, except for her ears, which swiveled toward Elena's voice with obvious interest. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in the relationship between predator and human, the first crack in a wall of mistrust that had existed for millennia. Elena had no way of knowing that hidden nearby, tucked safely in a den beneath a fallen log, were 2 tiny cubs that Artemis was fiercely protecting. The bear's acceptance of Elena's presence was not just tolerance, it was the beginning of an unprecedented trust. 3 weeks after their first encounter, Elena had established a routine that both she and Artemis seemed to accept. Every morning at dawn, she would position herself on a fallen log, approximately 50 yards from where she'd first met the great bear, armed with nothing more than her field notebook, a thermos of coffee, and an infinite supply of patience. Marcus Chen, Elena's research partner and closest friend, thought she had lost her mind. He stood now at the edge of the forest clearing, his expensive hiking boots sinking slightly into the dew-dampened earth, watching Elena through high-powered binoculars with a mixture of admiration and terror. "This is insane, Elena," he called. out in a harsh whisper, his voice carrying the slight accent of his San Francisco upbringing. "You're sitting in the territory of a 600-pound predator like you're having a picnic." Elena didn't turn around, but Marcus could see the slight smile on her profile as she continued writing in her notebook. "She's not just any predator, Marcus. She's a mother, and she's been testing me." As if summoned by their conversation, Artemis emerged from the dense thicket of pine and fir trees that bordered the clearing. Marcus instinctively took a step backward, his camera equipment rattling against his chest, but Elena remained perfectly still. The bear had grown comfortable with Elena's presence, but Marcus represented an unknown variable, another human whose intentions had yet to be proven. Artemis approached Elena's log with the measured pace of a creature completely in control of her environment. But today was different. Today, she wasn't alone. Two small, dark shapes tumbled out of the underbrush behind her, cubs that couldn't have been more than 4 months old, their fur still bearing the downy softness of infancy. Elena's breath caught in her throat. In all her years of research, she had never been granted such intimate access to a predator's family unit. The cubs were perfectly proportioned miniatures of their mother, with the same intelligent amber eyes and powerful build that would one day make them apex predators in their own right. The first cub, slightly larger than its sibling, approached Elena's log with the fearless curiosity that characterizes all young animals. Its mother watched intently, every muscle in her massive frame coiled and ready to spring into action at the first sign of danger. The second cub hung back, more cautious by nature, observing this strange two-legged creature from the safety of its mother's shadow. "Marcus," Elena whispered without moving, "are you getting this?" "Every second," Marcus replied, his camera clicking rapidly as he documented this unprecedented interaction. His initial fear had given way to professional excitement as he realized they were witnessing something that had never been recorded in the wild. An apex predator voluntarily introducing her offspring to a human. The bolder cub had now reached Elena's log and was attempting to climb up beside her, its tiny claws scraping against the bark as it struggled to gain purchase. Elena remained motionless except for her eyes, which tracked the cub's progress with gentle amusement. When the little bear finally succeeded in reaching the top of the log, it settled down barely 3 feet from Elena, mimicking its mother's patient observation pose. Artemis rumbled, not a growl of warning, but a low vocalization that Elena had learned meant approval. The bear was not just tolerating Elena's presence near her cubs, she was actively endorsing it. This was more than acceptance. It was an invitation into the family unit, a level of trust that went against every survival instinct encoded in the bear's DNA. The second cub, emboldened by its sibling's success, began its own approach. As it climbed onto the log, Elena made a decision that would define their relationship forever. Moving with glacial slowness, she extended her hand, palm up, toward the curious cub. The young bear sniffed cautiously, its wet nose tickling Elena's palm, before settling down on the other side of her. Elena found herself in the extraordinary position of being flanked by 2 grizzly cubs while their 600-pound mother watched. Approvingly, from just yards away, she was no longer an observer of their world. She had been accepted as part of it. 6 months had passed since Elena's first encounter with Artemis, and autumn had painted the Yellowstone wilderness in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The cubs, now considerably larger and more adventurous, had grown accustomed to Elena's presence as a fixture in their daily routines. But Elena's research had taken an unexpected turn when she discovered that Artemis's acceptance of humans wasn't an isolated incident. Dr. James Littlefeather, a wildlife biologist from the Crow Nation and Elena's new collaborator, crouched beside her in the early morning shadows of a rocky outcrop overlooking a vast meadow. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of field work, held a pair of binoculars steady as he observed the extraordinary scene unfolding below them. "In all my years working with wolves," James whispered, his voice carrying the weight of traditional knowledge passed down through generations, "I've never seen anything like this." Below them, a pack of grey wolves had formed an almost ceremonial circle around a lone figure, Sarah McKenna, a wildlife photographer who had been documenting the Yellowstone ecosystem for the past 2 years. The alpha female, a magnificent creature with silver-tipped fur and penetrating yellow eyes, stood directly in front of Sarah, their faces mere feet apart in what should have been an impossibly dangerous confrontation. Sarah had been following this pack for months, earning their gradual acceptance through the same patient, respectful approach that had worked for Elena with Artemis. But today marked a milestone that neither researcher had expected. The alpha female had brought her entire litter of 5 pups into the open, a display of trust that defied conventional understanding of wolf behavior. The pups, ranging in age from 6 to 8 weeks, tumbled and played around Sarah's seated form with the carefree abandon of domestic puppies. Their mother watched with alert but relaxed posture, occasionally rumbling soft corrections when the play became too boisterous. The other adult pack members, 3 males and 2 females, maintained their protective circle but showed none of the tension that typically accompanied human presence in wolf territory. "Look at their body language," Elena murmured, making notes. In her field journal, no raised hackles, no bared teeth, no aggressive posturing. They're treating Sarah like a member of the pack. James nodded, his understanding informed by both scientific training and traditional ecological knowledge from his ancestors. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the time before fear, when the animal nations and the human nation lived as relatives. I always thought they were just stories." Through her telephoto lens, Sarah captured images that would revolutionize understanding of predator-human relationships. One pup had fallen asleep across her lap, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath. Another was playfully tugging at her camera strap while its mother looked on with what could only be described as amusement. The alpha female made a decision that stunned even the experienced researchers watching from above. She approached Sarah directly, lowered her head, and gently nudged the photographer's hand with her muzzle, a gesture of acceptance and invitation that wolves typically reserved for pack members. But the most remarkable moment came when the alpha female called her pups to her with a low whine, then systematically brought each one to Sarah for what appeared to be a formal introduction. Each pup was guided to sniff Sarah's outstretched hand before receiving a gentle touch on its tiny head, a moment of interspecies communion that brought tears to Elena's eyes. "This isn't just happening with bears and wolves," Elena said, reviewing her extensive notes from the past months. "I've documented similar behaviors with mountain lions, lynx, even a wolverine that allowed a park ranger to examine her kits." James lowered his binoculars and looked at Elena with the gravity of someone who understood the profound implications of what they were witnessing. "Something is changing in the natural world. The predators are choosing to trust us, to let us into their most sacred spaces, their nurseries, their dens, their family circles." As they watched, Sarah slowly stood, careful not to disturb the sleeping pup in her lap. The alpha female approached, and in a gesture that would be remembered as a turning point in human-wildlife relationships, gently took the pup from Sarah's arms in her mouth and carried it back to the safety of the pack. It was a moment of perfect trust, a predator allowing a human to hold her most precious treasure, then taking it back with complete confidence that no harm had been done. The pack began to move toward the tree line, but not before the alpha female turned back one final time to regard Sarah with those intelligent yellow eyes. In that gaze was recognition, respect, and something that transcended the traditional boundaries between species. An acknowledgement that humans, when they approached with the right intentions, could be trusted with the most vulnerable members of the animal kingdom. Winter had settled over Yellowstone with its characteristic severity, blanketing the landscape in pristine snow that muffled sound and transformed familiar terrain into an ethereal wonderland. Eleanor stood at the entrance of a large cave system in the Lamar Valley, her breath forming crystalline clouds in the frigid air as she prepared for what might be the most significant moment of her research career. Beside her, Dr. Amara Okafor, a renowned ethologist from the University of Cape Town, adjusted her specialized recording equipment with hands that trembled slightly, not from cold, but from excitement. Amara had arrived just 2 weeks earlier after Elena's reports had reached the international scientific community, bringing with her decades of experience studying human-animal bonds in the African wilderness. The invitation came 3 days ago, Elena explained to Amara as they prepared their gear. Artemis approached my observation post and performed a series of behaviors I'd never seen before. Specific movements, vocalizations, even scent markings that seemed designed to communicate. Location and time, the cave before them, represented something unprecedented in recorded history. Through patient observation and gradual acceptance, Elena had been invited into what she could only describe as a winter gathering, a multi-species assembly that defied every conventional understanding of predator behavior and territorial dynamics. As they entered the cave system, their headlamps revealed a sight that left both scientists speechless. The large central chamber had been arranged almost like an amphitheater, with different species occupying distinct but connected spaces. Artemis and her now adolescent cubs occupied a raised alcove to the left, while the wolf pack Sarah had befriended claimed a similar position on the right. In the shadows beyond, Elena could make out the reflective eyes of mountain lions, lynx, and other apex predators that had, over the months, gradually accepted human presence in their territories. "This is impossible," Amara whispered, her voice echoing softly in the natural cathedral. "Competing predators don't share territory like this. They shouldn't be able to coexist in such close proximity." But as they observed more closely, both women began to understand that they were witnessing something far more complex than simple tolerance. The animals had arranged themselves in a pattern that seemed to minimize conflict while maximizing communication. Predators that would normally avoid each other or compete aggressively were sharing space with an organization that suggested intelligence and cooperation. In the center of the chamber, a small fire had been built and carefully maintained by the human participants who had been invited to this extraordinary gathering. Sarah McKenna sat cross-legged near the flames, flanked by 2 wolf pups who had grown comfortable enough to use her as a headrest. Across from her, a park ranger named Tom Blackhorse, a member of the Lakota Nation who had been working in Yellowstone for over 20 years, tended to an injured lynx kitten with the gentle expertise of someone who understood that healing transcended species boundaries. "Tom's been invited to several of these gatherings," Elena explained, as they found their own positions in the circle. "He believes we're witnessing the restoration of something ancient, a way of being that existed before fear and mistrust separated humans from the natural world." As the evening progressed, something remarkable began to unfold. The various predators, normally solitary or territorial, began to demonstrate behaviors that suggested not just tolerance, but active cooperation. A mountain lion mother brought her kitten forward to be examined by Tom, who had earned a reputation among the animals as a healer. Wolf pups played cautiously with bear cubs under the watchful eyes of their respective mothers. Most astoundingly, when Artemis's younger cub approached the fire and accidentally singed its paw, it was a lynx, traditionally a competitor to bears, who led the cub to Tom for treatment. "They're not just accepting us," Amara observed, her scientific training warring with the emotional impact of what she was witnessing. "They're incorporating us into their social structures, treating us as a specialized member of their community. One who can provide unique services they can't provide for each other." Elena nodded, finally understanding the profound transformation that had been occurring throughout the ecosystem. "We're not just observers anymore. We've become participants in something that might be the next stage of evolution, not biological evolution, but social evolution, a conscious choice by multiple species to move beyond the predator-prey competitor-territory paradigms that have defined survival for millennia." As the fire burned lower and the gathered animals began to settle into sleep, Elena realized that they had been granted access to something sacred, a new form of community that transcended species boundaries and offered hope for a different kind of future. The predators hadn't just accepted humans, they had chosen to trust them with their most vulnerable members and their most secret gatherings, creating a new form of family that encompassed the entire web of life. Spring had returned to Yellowstone, bringing with it a transformation that extended far beyond the usual cycle of seasonal renewal. Elena stood on the observation deck of the newly established Interspecies Research Center, a facility built through unprecedented cooperation between wildlife organizations, indigenous communities, and government agencies. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley below, where an extraordinary scene was unfolding that would have been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. Dr. Maria Santos, the center's first director and a former student of Elena's, joined her at the railing with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Maria's appointment had been unanimously supported by what the media had dubbed the Yellowstone Collective, the growing community of humans who had been accepted into the trust circles of various predator families. The morning report shows successful integration in 17 different sites across North America, Maria reported, her voice filled with quiet amazement. Bears in Alaska, wolves in Minnesota, mountain lions in California, all demonstrating the same patterns of selective human acceptance that started here. Below them, the valley had become a living laboratory where the boundaries between wild and domestic, predator and protector had been reimagined entirely. Artemis, now a grandmother with her daughter's new cubs, moved through the landscape with a confidence that came from knowing her territory was truly safe. The original cubs, now mature adults, had established their own territories and were beginning to extend the same trust to carefully selected humans that their mother had pioneered. Sarah McKenna emerged from the forest path, accompanied by a sight that never failed to take Elena's breath away. 3 generations of the wolf pack she had first encountered, walking beside her with the easy companionship of a family returning from a nature walk. The original alpha female, now showing silver in her muzzle, maintained her position as pack leader while sharing her wisdom with the younger generation about which humans could be trusted and how that trust should be extended. "The most remarkable development," Maria continued, "is that they're teaching their young about human cooperation from birth. Wolf pups and bear cubs are being raised with the understanding that certain humans are part of their extended family structure. This new generation of predators was growing up without the ancient fear and mistrust that had defined human-wildlife relationships for millennia. Instead, they were learning to evaluate humans as individuals, extending trust to those who demonstrated the qualities the animal community valued: patience, respect, consistent behavior, and genuine care for their welfare. Tom Blackhorse approached the deck from the research center's healing facility, where he now served as the lead coordinator for wildlife medical care. His work had evolved into something unprecedented, a veterinary practice where wild predators voluntarily brought their injured or sick young for treatment, then remained throughout the healing process as participants rather than patients. "Little Bear is ready to return to her mother," Tom announced, referring to a grizzly cub that had been brought to the center 3 weeks earlier by Artemis's daughter after the cub had fallen into a ravine. "Her leg has healed perfectly, and she's been asking for her family." As if summoned by his words, the cub's mother appeared at the edge of the forest, accompanied by Artemis and several other adult bears. They had been visiting daily throughout. The healing process, a behavior that demonstrated not just trust in human medical capabilities, but faith in human intentions. The reunion that followed, cub racing toward its mother while the extended bear family surrounded them in a circle of protection and joy, represented everything the new relationship had made possible. Elena reflected on the profound change that had occurred, not just in animal behavior, but in human understanding of their place in the natural world. The predators hadn't simply overcome their fear, they had made a conscious choice to include humans in their most sacred relationships. In return, humans had learned to approach wildlife not as conquerors or even protectors, but as relatives. In the larger family of life, the children born into this new world will grow up differently, Elena mused, watching as a group of young researchers worked alongside their wildlife partners in the valley below. They'll never know a time when predators were enemies, when the forest was a place of fear rather than family. Amara Okafor, now a permanent resident researcher, joined them on the deck with news from the global network of similar sites that had developed around the world. The African sites are reporting successful integration with lions and leopards. The Asian centers are seeing remarkable results with tigers and snow leopards. What started here has become a worldwide transformation. As the day progressed and the various human and animal families went about their integrated routines, Elena understood that they had witnessed and participated in something far greater than a simple change in animal behavior. They had been present at the birth of a new form of consciousness, one that recognized no fundamental division between human and animal, predator and protector, wild and domestic. The deadly predators had not only accepted humans, they had invited them to help create a new world where trust, cooperation, and mutual care could flourish across species boundaries. In allowing humans near their young, they had given the ultimate gift, a future where the next generation would know only harmony, where their ancestors had known only fear. The sun set over Yellowstone, casting the valley in golden light that seemed to bless this new covenant between species. In that light, cubs and children played together while their parents, both human and animal, watched with the contentment of those who had found their way home to a larger understanding of family, community, and love.